everyone. So I'm going to do it's called the education tag. There's one tag that's a little bit similar to this one, and her focus is my experience in education. Do I have a job as a result of that? So if you want to do this tag and you want to just talk about your own personal experiences, I recommend checking that one out. Her channel and the whole chain for that tag is not very active anymore, so you're welcome to attach that one to this one, or however you want to work that. So I'm going to try my best to keep this under 10 minutes. This is my second take and it was like 30 minutes, so I'm going to cut this down as short as I can. The focus I'm going to have for this tag is going to be Native Canadian education from a Northern Ontario point of view. So I'm going to approach this from a very local point of view. I created this tag hoping that we can have a conversation about education, because around the world I think everybody has a slightly different point of view for education, and talking about it together, hopefully we can learn different ways that education systems are set up, so we can develop better systems that can help us locally and globally. Courtney Pickles, we talked about this privately and she helped me to edit some of the questions, so a huge thank you. And she wants to talk about this from the sex ed point of view, which is a huge issue in Ontario right now. If you want to talk about this from a teacher's point of view, homeschooling point of view, a mom with a book, I think that would be her point of view. She's a homeschooler. Just whatever, especially if you're a teenager in high school right now, because I've been out of high school for a long time, so my point of view is very old school and it doesn't really apply anymore. So yeah, so I mean there's so many different points of view. So I'm not going to talk about immigration, people of color, anything like that. I'm only going to talk about from a Native Canadian point of view, Northern Ontario. Number 1, what country did you get your education in? That would be Northern Ontario, Canada. Number 2, what's your educational background? I attended public school. I went to the Catholic school board system all the way from elementary straight through to high school. And then I went to university where I attended university and earned a general BA, general arts BA. So I do not have a specialty. I just have a broad base. Number 3, how's your public education structured? Is there a private school option? I'm pretty sure we have private schools, though I don't know anybody who ever attended one. And we have daycare that some parents send their children to just to get them an early start. We have kindergarten, elementary, grades 1 to 6. Junior high is grades 7 and 8. High school is grade 9 to 12. And then we have college that's geared towards practical job training, and university for job training and theory. We also have French immersion for helping Canadians to be bilingual in English and French, or to preserve French language and culture. We also have the Roman Catholic School Board, which I attended, and we have an emerging education section for Native Canadian people. So out west they have, I think it's a college or university that's run by Native people for Native education, and they have a different education philosophy than the mainstream public school system. They bring in a lot of the cultures into the classroom for promoting and preserving the traditional teachings and the language. So in Northern Ontario, in my hometown of Thunder Bay, we have another the Native high school. It's because Thunder Bay is special. It's one of the major satellite cities for Native people from all of the communities up north. And the northern part of Ontario is about the size of some European countries. It's a huge landmass. And some of those communities are 100, 500, or 1,000 people. So they have a lot less resources than Thunder Bay does, and way less resources than a major city like Toronto. So education is very different up there compared to Thunder Bay and Toronto. And a lot of those Native youth, they have to come to Thunder Bay or one of the other satellite cities to attend high school, because they only have elementary, so there could only be one teacher who could be white or native, teaching grades 1 to grade 6 in a single classroom. So there's a lot of educational barriers that they have that, I mean, you cannot imagine something like that in Toronto. I mean, unless they're a homeschooler, there's no, every grade has their own teacher. We had some dual classes where we had grade 5 and 6 in a class together, or grade 3 and 4 in a class together. We had that in elementary school. I don't know if they still do. So to get teachers up on those northern communities, a lot of times they need a teacher who's willing to relocate and move up there, and that can be a challenge. So there could be some native people that are willing to go back to their reserve and teach, or they go to a different reserve. Because of personal reasons. It's just better if they don't actually know anybody on the reserve when they go there to teach. Having the native high school, some people could consider that like a form of segregation, but the students who come here have extra challenges that the mainstream students just don't have. So it's a difficult conversation. It's different than like apartheid, where it was enforced segregation. The native students who come here, they have a choice if they want to go to the native high school or any of the other ones. They can choose any of the other ones that they want to. And they can even choose if they want to go to Thunder Bay High School, or Sault Ste. Marie, or the other communities. So they have a lot of choice. I think that's a big difference between whether it's going to teeter into segregation or not, because they're when they go to the high school, it could be partially education, partially counseling and healing and preserving the culture, and just reminding them that they can feel pride at being native. And I think that has such amazing potentials. But again, when they finish high school, they have to join mainstream white society at some point. So there's still a lot of delicate challenges to sort out with that. And then of course, if there's any racism towards native students, and there is a lot of racism still, but there's a lot of people that are working hard to fight it and reduce it. So number 4, is it more common to study in your own country, or do parents send their children to other countries, and why? So this is really common in Asian countries, to send their children to an English-speaking country to become bilingual in their native language and English. In Canada, I think it's more common to study in Canada because parents want to keep their children close with them. And we do have a lot of exchange programs set up. So especially in my university, when I was there 10 years ago, we had 10 refugee students who came here from different countries, and they were actually supported and sponsored by the university as the small organization that was set up trying to encourage people to come over. And we have exchange programs, so a student would go and another student would come. But Canada, we had a lot of problems with people actually leaving. We didn't have enough people leaving to go to a different country. So we always had a lot more people that wanted to come here versus us wanting to leave. So that was one of the challenges for their program. We had exchange teachers. We had one from Australia. And number 5, what does your country consider to be a priority for education? A condensed answer. This seems to change every year. I don't really think education prepares students for practical life. I hope someone else answers that in their video as the main focus of their video. Ontario does seem to be very political in terms of education. We have a very political climate here. I would really like to hear a younger person talk about if they feel like their education is going to be useful or not, because when I was in high school, that was my feeling. It wasn't going to be very practical, and I wonder if that is still applicable today. I was very literal. So the Ontario government, this is a chart of their vision, of their goals for education, and it's a focus group. They just sat down with students and I guess a whole bunch of different people, and they just came up with this chart, and it has a list of popular topics for education. So it's a really interesting site to go and visit if you're trying to brainstorm how you want to approach this. And I think the answer to this question, we have to ask different people, because everybody's going to answer this question differently, and then differently from their own life experience and differently from where they're located. Like my answers from Northern Ontario is going to be different than Toronto, way different than the Maritimes or Alberta or the US, any of the different states in the US. So again, I mentioned Thunder Bay is one of the satellite cities for all the northern communities. So for my local area, perspectives would be to prepare kids for the workforce, perhaps entering them into the skilled trades, because this is essentially a redneck town. So we had a lot of logging camps here, and shipping and paper mills and stuff like that. That was our main industry. It's kind of like Detroit in that regard in terms of industry. And education for Native people would be one of the main focuses for preserving their culture, helping them to move away from the effects of colonized history, and to give hope to reduce the amount of suicides that the youth are facing. And adult literacy is actually still a challenge for some people. I can see it in my hometown that there's different levels of literacy. There's adults in my hometown that I've met and spoken with who cannot read. Some of them have a functioning ability, so they can read a menu, they could read a street sign, they could read a bus schedule, but they would not be able to read a children's book or a short story or even a novel. And then of course some can read novels. There's different levels of literacy. So if somebody cannot read in Canada today, how much of that is based on the education system failing them, because it absolutely would fail them, or mental health issues? And then of course getting into education from a mental health issue background would be a really interesting way to do this tag as well, or being illiterate and doing this tag. For the education preparation and using school, elementary and high school, to get a job and to fast track to college or university. So I guess people who have a goal of getting into one of the Ivy League schools, and their perspective would be quite different. And 20 years ago in high school in my hometown, we had a math program for students who wanted to pursue pure math as a field of study in university. So they were on a fast track for that. And the different high schools here each had a slightly different focus or goal. Like you went to one high school if you wanted to get into the sciences, you went to a different one if you wanted to pursue like the makeup stuff, and so you have all these different high schools for these different purposes. But today we have just one major high school, so it's a whole bunch of different high schools and they're all built into one super high school. I am long gone from high school, so it would be interesting to hear from somebody who attends a super high school. That super high school, it covers grades 7 all the way up to grade 12. So you have 13-year-olds in the same school building as an 18 or 19-year-old. So what are the challenges of that? It was extremely controversial when they were coming out with that, because we protested madly about that, because we felt it was so wrong to have such a huge age gap in the same school. And that would be getting into dating and sexual assault and sex ed topics, and safety of youth, and then bullying. And are there any controversies or current issues with education right now? Again, sex ed, Courtney Pickles mentioned she wants to discuss that in hers, so I'll leave that for her. I think sex ed applies all across Canada to some degree, and possibly the US. And then the guns in the US is also a really huge issue with the shootings and stuff like that. And in my northern city, the youth with the Native high school are turning up in rivers, dead. That's a huge issue that we're facing up here right now. And I'll link in the video for the 7 Fallen Feathers that talks about that in more detail. So trying to encourage the youth to finish high school and not commit suicide is another huge issue that we're facing. And we have the Native high schools, at least 10 years ago we did, unless budget cuts or something, where they would actually just be there to listen to the kids and be like, what's wrong? What can I do? How can I help you? And the Native counselors were Native, so they come from the same background, so they understand, they have that same language, and they would just help them to graduate. And I remember at the end of the year, the source of pride was how many people graduated this year, how many did we get through. how many were saved. That was the sense of pride for that. This chart that I'll put up here, it shows a different point of view. This is the one that the Native students put together with their focus, and you can see that little that circle. That is a whole philosophy. The easiest way to compare it would be the Bible. The Bible is a huge philosophy for a lot of people. It's a way of life. It's where they go for all their teachings and their lessons and stuff. The Taoism symbol, the Buddha, these are all symbols, but they represent a huge philosophy. So that's what this medicine wheel represents. It's a whole life philosophy, and it encompasses everything from medicine to ways of living to thinking to art to creating stories to the purpose of life to what to do when you're in pain. It encompasses everything. And so you can see how different theirs is. And number 7, university, yay or nay? What's the climate for this in your country? So when I was younger, university was kind of like this magical, non-existent something that just kind of lived off with unicorns and clouds and stuff like this. So it wasn't never really a practical thing that you'd ever actually like see. Kind of. It was just so distant because, again, I'm raised in a redneck town where our main industry is to work in the paper mills or to get a job on the ships or work at one of the many stores that we have or call centers or something like that. Those are the main industries that we have. Like we have like a couple of libraries and stuff like this, but we don't really have any industry here because that's just how we're set up. I think we have that commonality with Detroit. So Detroit, car making, manufacturing and stuff. Ours is shipping trees to become paper because we have trees up here. So university locally, we have a university, and it's amazing what they can do with such a small tiny little building and population of only like I think it's 2,000 students, maybe 3 at the most. I don't think there's very many. And so, but in general across Canada and the world maybe I think university is actually just kind of being questioned about how useful it is, because it seems like everybody has a university degree. So how many people are actually getting a job from those degrees? I remember when I graduated, there was no jobs to be seen, but I applied like crazy. So that's one of the reasons I went to Korea, so at least I could have like a real job before I get old. And I mean, that's the only time that I ever actually got like a real job, and all the other times it's just working in stores and call centers and stuff like that. So that's my whole job history. And people pay thousands of dollars to work at a store. I mean, there's just no jobs out there. I mean, it's crazy. You have to invent your own job is what you have to do nowadays. So university, I don't know, maybe it's not useful. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's debate. That would be an interesting discussion for a whole video. How often does university actually lead to a job? Or is college actually better in learning the trades? Because there's a lot of jobs in trades. So I talked for 20 minutes, but it's faster than it was. So yeah, so jobs, university, who knows? So maybe you have to get a master's, but you might be overqualified for that. PhD, if you're gonna go directly, if you're gonna stay in academia, you need a PhD, so maybe that one's useful. But again, it would be interesting to have different perspectives on this. Like if you're from Toronto and you go to university in Toronto, was that more useful than living in a mining, logging city and going to university? Like it's going to be a different perspective. So what books or types of books did you have to read in school? Any that you liked? Did school make you a reader? What's the most useful thing that you learned in school? Any projects that really stood out for you? This is where you can really get into the details of your education background. The Read My Country tag is really useful for getting into the specifics of books from a country point of view. Just for myself, Hamlet would be my favorite book that I read in high school. And in English class, we read a Shakespeare play every year. I always took the advanced level English. They got rid of that system, so it was advanced, general, and basic. advanced, I think we did a lot more poetry than they would have done in general, or a basic was just kind of, I'm gonna finish high school and then that's the end of my education and get a job. And then general was I'm gonna go to college after, then advanced is I'm gonna go to university. So in short, I'd say a combination of school and endless supplies of books in childhood is what really made me a reader. But I read for enjoyment now, and a lot more than I did in high school. And university is what really actually caused me to love reading. And it was teaching in Korea is what made me rediscover novels and actually really develop a love of reading novels. So in high school, the most useful things that I learned are actually really few. I can't say I learned very many useful things. I did take a world geography class, which had the teacher on day one said, my one goal for you guys is to memorize the world map. That's it. Memorize the map and you will pass this class. And I was like, yes, this is the class for me. And I loved it. So we had to memorize all of the countries, the capital cities of all the countries, a lot of the physical geography, and every week or every month, I can't remember, I think it was every week, he would give us a printout and we had to actually just label all the different countries, and that was our test. And it was all just based on memorizing. Very useful. Very, very useful skill. I see these things on the internet where people can't recognize countries on maps, and it's difficult to realize that, and they look like they've been to school, so they should. Like, there's a lot of people who have not been to school and they can identify a map a lot better than people who have. So anyways, and business class, we learned about debit, credit, cards, budgeting, that kind of stuff. But the typing class was actually the most useful, how to touch type. That's the most useful skill that I learned. And I did go to a Catholic high school where we learned about the Bible, but the focus was actually on journaling and who you are as a person, and that was really useful. I don't follow any organized religion at all, none, zero. So I learned the Bible because it is really important to Western culture, and I went to Catholic school because I heard that the teachers were better than public school. And that's it. So poetry units in high school were a great complement to the religion class. My favorite year for the religion class was where we learned about world religions. We studied the basics of the 7 major religions around the world, another very useful thing that I learned. So we learned the basics of and the scriptures of Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Shamanism, and Buddhism and Taoism, and of course Christianity for 10 years. So just learning the basics of how all those different religions functioned is exceedingly useful. That, and how to read a poem and study it and study your own mind, very useful things. So I think the content, and then in the religion class we did sex ed and the basics of birth control and family planning. I think the content was very relevant at the time because the internet was based on dial-up, so adult inappropriate things was, I'm sure it existed, but I mean it's dial-up, so it's a lot different than HD today. And cell phones today, the cell phones are about this big, so there's no way you can do like sexting that they do nowadays. They didn't have any pictures on a cell phone. It was basically a house phone that didn't have a cord. And number 9, while in school I enjoyed reading, and English was a favorite subject. The grammar was not one of my favorites, and we had an independent study unit in the final year of English class. I loved the freedom of that project. We were given a book, or we chose a book, and we wrote an essay about it, and that's it. That was all. We had the whole entire year to work on it, and I absolutely loved that project because it had so much freedom. And number 9, just 3 more questions. Is there anything bookish about your high school or education you'd like to talk about? In school, there was a sense of protecting Canadian identity from American influence because we get so much American TV up here. And we learned about Canadian history. We just barely touched on the Native culture. We did not learn about the residential schools or the darker chapters of Canadian history, which I think we absolutely need to teach. And even now I can list more American presidents and Canadian ones. I can locate a decent number of states and their capitals. Well, number 10. How do you think your education system compares with that around the world? So the only one I can compare with is Canadian and Korea. A large part of the population of Korean students are studying English, and some of the workers, the male professionals, are kind of wondering how useful that is. And certainly not every student. Some students are favoring Chinese. Some have specific career choices that they're working towards. Korea also has international schools, which are quite multicultural. These schools vary quite a bit on their focus. Some international schools are for Korean students who have a goal of going to an Ivy League school in the US. So they are on the fast track to attending Harvard or Stanford, and that's their plan. So those international students are very different from the children of farmers. So the farmers also attend international schools, and they are multicultural students because one parent, usually the male, is Korean and the female is usually from Vietnam or Cambodia or one of the southern Asian countries, Philippines, because I guess Korean women tend to kind of move to the cities and marry a rich Korean guy, to be very stereotypical and oversimplifying. So the farmers, the male farmers, would find a woman who maybe she's from a farm. She has the option of marrying a Vietnamese guy or a Korean guy, and they're both farmers. She's going to choose a Korean guy because her life could be better or different or more secure or stable or safe or something like that. This is way too oversimplified, but that's basically it. And these students would be considered, it's called Kyopo is the Korean word for it. In English it means Korean American, Korean Cambodian, Korean something else. And it doesn't add to the dark connotation of being a half-breed, which Canadian Native people, especially in the 70s, would be called half-breeds or apples or something like that. It just means that you're half Native and half something else with a racist bad connotation. So just Kyopo just simply means Korean something else. It just means that they're a little bit, simple. Because Korea is so homogeneous still, these students have challenges that other Korean students don't have. So the multicultural students have challenges that mainstream Korean students don't have. And then of course you can get into the socioeconomic differences between the farmers and the Harvard-focused Korean students. Their backgrounds and their life stories are going to be different. And I wonder how that can relate to the Native students up here in Northern Ontario compared to, I'm going to go to McGill University. So it's some similarities, some differences. And 11, are there any educational quirks that exist in your own country? Anything else you'd like to add? So there is a lot of topics you can talk about. You can get into tuition, student debt, access to affordable higher education, even the importance of education or standards of education or relevant teaching materials. There's so many different ways you can approach this tag. So that is all. I think education should just be free and accessible to everybody who wants it, and I think it should just be simple that way. So that's all. So thanks for listening. The people I'm going to tag is Ola Quinn. She learned about this tag. We chatted about it in the comments, and I would love to hear her opinions on this. She's from Venice. And Courtney Pickles, of course, we talked in Twitter quietly about this, and everybody else who wants to do this. I will put this on that little kind of Twitter discussion, and I'll just kind of leave it if people want to do this. If you want to, awesome. If you don't want to, absolutely no offense or no sad feelings or anything like that. It is a huge topic, and it is a crazy hard tag to put together because you can easily talk for 3 hours about this, and it can branch off into like millions of different smaller videos. So that's all. Thanks for listening. Bye everyone.